Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Unexpected Detour. We're in life, detours are inevitable. I'm your host, Frances Hammond, and today I have the pleasure of having Sally McQuallen. She is a licensed clinical social worker, a certified alcohol and drug counselor, and she wrote a book. Oh, wait, I got the book, Sally. You want to tell me the name of the book? I had it
Happy
here.
to
I'm
tell
sorry.
you. It's called Reaching for Beautiful. It is a memoir of loving and losing a wild child.
Yes, I do apologize. I had it already, and then the phone went dead, but okay. All right. So I know you had three children, and Christopher was the oldest. Tell us a little bit about Christopher, because he seems like my kind of guy.
I'm telling you, Francis, he was my kind of guy from the get-go, and I didn't even know what my kind of guy was. Sometimes I laugh because I felt so surprised by who I ended up raising. Such a, he was some babies, I guess, developmentally, they might start walking at 12 months, 13 months, maybe much later. He was already running at 9 months, and that set the tone for his busyness. He was just a firework, and I didn't know what I was doing because I hadn't done it before, but I was trying desperately to keep up with him. And pretty early on, recognized that I also needed to keep him safe because he was so fearless. And of course, I think most of us as mothers see that as part of our job responsibility. It's keep your child safe, keep them alive. And so I took that job very seriously and was racing along, but couldn't keep my eye on him every second of every day. And he would inevitably, whether it was falling in preschool, whether it was, just little things that began to keep me on my toes, he was outward in motion. And I do love that. And I married his dad, who's like that. So why would I think that my children would be otherwise? I don't know.
Christopher seemed like he was the strong-willed child. That's
Very.
what he seems like. Nothing, he wasn't afraid of anything. He reminds me when I was listening about how he was, I thought about my son and how my son got these rollerblades, and it just drove me crazy because every 5 minutes you're worried about your child.
It's
It
true.
could be the littlest thing, and you're like, oh, all you can do is just pray for him. But
That's
I
right.
said Christopher seemed like somebody I would have really enjoyed. I probably would have had a lot of gray hair, but I probably would have enjoyed him. Yeah.
So true. He was so charming. I'm biased, but he was beautiful. He just shone. His sparkly green eyes were captivating. He drew people in. He loved people. All he wanted to do was be with friends from a very early age. And so that was part of, back when he was born in 94, and there weren't even cell phones until he got to be older. And so it's an interesting thing to be, I was born where you just would go outside and you'd never your mom would never even pay any attention to where you'd been, and you'd maybe
No.
show up for dinner and all of that. Whereas, at this point with my kids' generation of millennials, we were meant to be keeping up with them at every turn, and he didn't make that easy. I often said I wished I had a little GPS. Now apparently there are these applications you can put on your phone to know exactly what your children are doing. And part of me is actually, I think some degree of ignorance is bliss, right? We don't want to know. My mom was fortunate not to
That's
know.
what I said. I don't want to know. Mm-mm.
No, no.
No.
Yeah. And so I was so lucky to be his mom, and but a big part of raising him, I admit, I was fearful. And part of that has to do with the fact that I was already a sort of fearful little girl. I grew up with an alcoholic father who behaved sort of unpredictably and angrily and scared me and didn't know what to do with a girl, let alone four children. I have three younger brothers, and I actually have some half brothers and a half brother and a half sister, but that starts to get into Brady Bunch, it starts to get
Oh, okay, I
complicated,
understand.
right? But I love all of my siblings, and but my dad was just sort of ill-equipped. And so that fear got me to a place of, I was sort of, I wouldn't say nervous, but there was this inner fear, and there was definitely a sadness inside. And it wasn't until Christopher was born, when I was 30, that I recognized that I had been a little depressed and a little anxious all of my life. And I also had to make a big pivot, speaking of different detours that we inevitably have in our lives. At 25, I was at a crossroads, and I'd gotten into far more than I could handle with drugs and alcohol, and was fortunate enough to get clean and sober, and my whole life turned around. So here I am in recovery. I meet my husband in recovery, and we go
Oh,
on to have children. Well, of course, lo and behold, those children are going to be much like their parents. They're going to be um, potentially dealing with addiction. And certainly, um, Christopher was dealing with, was eventually, I think he was 10 when we officially diagnosed him with attention deficit, which explained his
oh, his
always being in
excitement all over
motion.
the place.
Exactly. Yes, yes. Um,
Oh,
yeah, he wasn't, he couldn't focus easily, and so he was often running, and you'd tell him to do something, and he'd decide to do whatever it was he wanted to do instead.
was he like that in school?
He was, he, you know, I often told him I think he was really bright, he was clever, he was witty, he was one of the funniest people I've ever known. And again, that was one of the things that appealed to me about my husband, was that he could make me laugh.
Oh,
And so Chris was really funny. In fact, Francis, I just stumbled on, I'd looked at it before, but so he's been, I believe, in heaven now for the last 9 years. And over time, it's been such a process. But I'd already looked at his Instagram page at some point and chuckled about the fact that I had requested to be his Instagram friend, and he never let me be his friend because he wanted to be able to do what he was doing without his mom seeing what he was doing. But even in his profile, which I'm sure I'd seen before, but it just kind of hit me, I think it was yesterday. He said, it says something like, it's describing him at his fraternity in college, and it's basically saying, and I've been known to howl at the moon.
oh, whereas my son, he was like, if you want to see what I'm doing, look for me on Instagram. But he doesn't put anything there, so I don't know what you're doing.
That's, you know what, that's another possibility, right? I've got another one like that, and
Oh,
you
because I know
can't.
you have three.
I
You have
do.
a son and a daughter, right? Other than
Yes.
Christopher.
So Christopher would be 31 now. He passed at 21. Caroline just turned 29 yesterday,
Oh, okay.
and William is 25.
Oh, they still live in the home with you?
They do not.
Oh,
William
okay.
lives off in Colorado with his girlfriend, and he
Oh,
just loves that area. And Caroline isn't too far. She's in the western suburbs of Chicago, and I'm in the
oh, okay.
northern suburbs. And she's living with her fiance. They're getting married in August.
Oh, okay. So you
Yeah,
have another son.
I do. Oh, I thank God every day that I
Oh,
have.
you have another son.
Hmm.
That'll be awesome. I know when I was listening to the podcast, you went to a medium.
We did. My husband is pretty remarkable because he, you'd think of him as this tough Irish, he's from Buffalo.
Oh, he's from New York too, huh?
He's from New York. So I
Oh.
love your New York accent. Yep, he's from Buffalo. He's the youngest of 10 kids.
Wow.
Um, quite a story there. And he was really, it's funny, one of his favorite sisters, the two of them decided on a whim to go and see a psychic or a medium, and had this incredible experience where my sister-in-law Marcia was dating a guy at the time, and the medium said, you're going to marry a man, you're going to end up having 12 kids, which would be such a crazy impossibility. She fast forward maybe 6 months later, maybe she'd even started dating Tom at that time. He was formally married and had had 10 kids, whereas Marcia was formally married and had two, and they end up getting
That's
married.
the 12 kids.
Yes, which, and so he had this pre-existing belief that there was something to this. And so the day, I think, or maybe the day after Christopher died, he reached out to one. And that set the tone for, he was kind of encouraging me. I was more sort of desperately yearning, wanting to believe there is a heaven, but not necessarily, my religious background was different.
Right, because you were Catholic.
He was Catholic and
Oh,
I
he
grew up
was Catholic.
Protestant.
Because I
Yeah.
know in Catholicism they teach you about purgatory. And
Yes.
purgatory is like the middle. You're not going to heaven, you're not going the other place, you just sit and wait. And that's purgatory. I went to Catholic school, so I
Did you
grew up
go?
as a
I was
Catholic.
going to
Yeah,
say, you know better than I, and we did end
yeah.
up raising our children that way. And I think that the Catholic faith has made some small changes over time, but I do think that many people I know who've been raised Catholic, they feel kind of fearful about what's going to happen when you die, because you
Because
might,
they make you feel that way.
yeah, and
I
that's
can tell you
really a shame.
from going to Catholic school, they'll make you feel that way, you know. So
It's no,
I couldn't deal with it anymore. So I was like, I'm out.
I don't blame you, and I've seen way too many people negatively affected from that. And my husband, fortunately, isn't one of them. He just kind of, and then I think really having entered recovery, we both were introduced to a different kind of spirituality where you can define your own higher power, and you can sort of think in terms of that higher power as being more supportive and comforting.
Because I
And
know in AA, they teach you about God.
right.
I believe it was based on all of that. I've been there before. I don't remember, but I do
Yes.
remember that part. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. You can think about your higher power any which way you want to. It could be that you choose to call it God, as I do, as I've come to. But I just believe there's a power of good. And it's been so interesting as a result of losing a child to be trying to make meaning and understand things that I never would have thought to try to understand before because I just didn't have to. And and so I'd always wanted to believe that someone maybe was looking out for me in some way and that I could, I certainly had some foxhole prayers where it was like, hey, help me, I don't want to die, and I certainly prayed to keep each of my children safe. But I've come to believe that there's some like greater plan that's beyond my understanding. I know we're here to grow and to learn, and none of us are meant to be spared from difficulty. And
Yes.
some of us, for some reason, have far more than others in this lifetime. But I kind of like the idea of maybe breaking the legacy of addiction, for the people who come
Yeah, I
after me.
that part I understood because it runs in my family too. But I never knew that it was like it can become hereditary.
Oh, it's so
And my mother
powerful.
used to tell me that it's hereditary, you know. And I just pray for my son that, that it passes him over. He said he doesn't have that problem. So I get it when you said about the addiction. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you always say, I'm not gonna be like that when I grow up.
Right, right. You
And
you know, you
yeah,
think that you've got more power over some of these things, or I certainly did. I
yes.
thought, and I remember someone saying to me, "Well, I'm really good. I'm not going to develop this addiction, or I'm really smart, or I'm really, and what's really it's a it it- it's sort of a non, there's absolutely nothing um it's universal. Like everybody's gonna, like our statistics of developing it, although actually I've come to think if you are of, just like if you're of Native American descent or if you're of Irish descent, your odds might even be higher, of and I was just reading something the other day that said if, and I didn't, of course I didn't know this, and I thought I was just gonna love my children so hard that they wouldn't have to face addiction of their own. But if two of your parents come from a line where there's addiction, then you could be up to 8 times more likely to develop it. So it's tough to, and it doesn't discriminate. It hits us all, doesn't it?
And it happened to hit Christopher.
It sure did. It sure
Yeah.
did. He was so reckless and in the moment so free spirited that he wasn't doing some of what it actually helps to do. If you're drinking or using, is to think about consequences of any kind. He sort of lived invincibly, but he also ended up having at least three near death accidents even before
Mhm.
he eventually died in the accident that took him to heaven. And
Yeah. Now let me ask you something because I told you I know other people who have lost their children. Like I have a neighbor, her son was murdered, and he was killed in a fire. My son is 42 this year. So this young man was 15 when it happened, like in the 80s.
oh,
And I see her and I still see the hurt there. And I had a cousin, her son died at 16. And I did have a half brother who was murdered. And I look at these parents and it's like it's just a weight that they're carrying. Even though they smile on the outside, on the inside, I'm sure it's heavy. And I can't explain it, but I'm sure you could explain it, how it made you feel. That was a child you carried for 9 months. You reared him, you raised him, and all of a sudden God takes him away. Mm.
Truly one of the loves of my life. I really could not have loved him any more than I did. And I'm part of the reason that I decided to take what I was writing to my son, Christopher. I was just writing to him and letting him know how I was feeling and trying to process my grief after he died. One of the things I was hoping that writing this book would do was to help other grieving parents feel less alone, because there are way too many of us. And young people, it's traumatic to lose a child, no matter any which way it happens, because it's unexpected, right? It's just unexpected, and it's
It's
out.
an unexpected detour for sure.
Yeah. And so it rocks your world. And when I think about people who've had to deal with things like um, having an ill child, or having a child who's been murdered, or a child who's taken their own life, that it compounds the pain that is already the greatest pain I've ever known.
Right,
So
right.
I just, I have so much compassion. And you were right when you said you, you obviously are sensitive to what you're feeling from the people that you love and care about.
Yes,
That and I do believe it's true, we are forever changed,
right.
when
Sally, let me
when
just
lightning
pause
strikes.
1 minute. 1 minute.
Hmm.
Okay, now we can continue. Okay, yeah. No,
So
I cried when I listened to your story. And, I thought about the people I know that have lost their kids. Um, and because some of them were my relatives and the neighbors and I remembered as I was going to work about the young lady who died at work. Yeah. And her mother ended up raising her two kids. So all of that, your story brought back memories. And I said, I wondered how you felt. Because before I got to you, I called somebody because I wanted to ask her, how does she feel?
yes,
And she
yeah,
said, it's been, let me see, her son would have been 50 years old, 53 years old. So he died at 15. So he never got to see anything else. And her heart aches for him because that
yes,
was her firstborn.
yes,
And she doted over him. So that's when I understood how you felt. That was your firstborn. And when I listened and you talked about how you did everything for Christopher, you got the book and all of that stuff, I laughed because I told the co-worker, I said, so now you have another baby. I said, how come they don't have a book? They were, oh, I'm busy, I'm busy. Then they had another baby. I said, well, she's out. 3, that's a charm. Yeah, that was it. Yeah. So I thought about it and I laughed. I said, see, I was right. That first one, that's the one.
it's funny
And I
that
don't think
way.
we intend to do that, but I
No,
think it's just we're in awe of this child that we gave birth to. We have a big responsibility. We're a mother, and you have to care for this child,
that's right,
and you do the
that's
best
right.
you could. And I think you did a good job.
I appreciate that.
Yes, you and don't you blame yourself for nothing. That's what I want to tell you.
Thank you so much. I
because you have nothing
love
to
the
do
way
with
you
it.
put that. I love the way you put that. Like yeah, in awe of
Hmm.
this. And then, I was going to tell you a funny story about my William. I remember he said, where's my baby book, Mom? What was my first word? And by the time he came around, I was so busy.
Exactly. William
And
didn't get anything.
yeah, he didn't get a baby book. So I ended up making him one when he was about 18.
Oh, okay. I'm
And
sure
then
that touched his heart.
I just tried to think about, well, wait a minute, I can't remember, but I'm going to maybe have to make a few things up.
Yeah, because you had Christopher, then you had your daughter, and then here comes baby three. By then, you're busy.
You're busy. And so I am really conscious of what you're kind of talking about, which is, you know, Christopher, because he was the first, because he was wild, because we needed to send him away and get him clean and sober at 16, his sister and brother, and also because guess what? Although I'm crazy about him and will always be, he also was not always nice to his brother and sister.
I was going to ask you about that relationship.
Yes, it wasn't easy to be, related to him.
Oh,
He'd get frustrated, and they just, looked up to him and idolized him. And he kind of just thought,
and
hey,
he
you guys
brushed them
are,
off. He was like,
yep,
I don't have time for you.
that's right. I've got to hang out with my friends. And then he was also not here while there was a period of time where he was away at a therapeutic boarding school to stay clean and make sure he got clean and
Right,
sober. And, we were lucky enough to do that, or it wouldn't have been possible.
right.
But he took up a lot of our attention. And so we're conscious of the fact that now that he's not here, we don't want him to
Did
get
you say
our
in a nice way? All you have to do is say he transitioned.
yes,
That's
yes,
it.
I
You
like that.
never had, I don't like the other words. I always say transitioned.
I like that. I'm still kind of playing around all these years later with what feels right. And I think
He is
I
your
like that.
angel. He is your guardian angel and your husband. He's watching over you. That's why I asked you about the medium, because for me, I don't believe in that, but people have to find some kind of closure. So this is a way of finding closure, that you look for other outlets to find this closure. And
Yes.
for me, it didn't work. I mean, I never tried it, but I know when I lost my oldest brother, I dreamt about him. And I dreamt he went to heaven. And I dreamt I went up to these church stairs and he was there.
That
I
sounds
went
about right.
looking for him.
Hmm.
Now, with my mother, I dream about her. I never see her face. I think I'm hearing her voice
Yes.
until my son found a recording of her voice from when he was little.
Okay.
And he went and bought a cassette player because he wanted to see what was on that cassette player. Because him and grandmother were like this, peas in
Oh,
the pod. And he played it and he cried. And then he called me up and he was like, Ma, I want you to hear this. And I dropped the phone because what I hear in my head is not what her voice sounded like on that tape. So it was a voice that I made up in my own head. So if you have any recordings of Christopher, do not get rid of them. This way you can always go back and hear what he really sounded like when he was here and not what you think he sounded like.
yes. Well, what's interesting, and I certainly respect. I'm so skeptical, so I know that it's so hard to even imagine that somebody could be channeling a loved one's spirit. But I think what I've been taught by the experience of going to these people is that depending upon the personality of the spirit, they're going to come through differently. And of course, Christopher was so powerful here. He's going to make himself known. In fact, one time we went to a medium reading and we were in a big, huge group of people, and and the medium did bring Chris through, and Chris, at the end of being channeled, and it wasn't long, said he was trying to help bring another spirit through who was more shy. And then the mother stood up and she said, "That's my son." And
Hmm.
then, so in other words, their personality apparently in spirit stays consistent, but some people hear the voice of their loved one. It's usually in their own mind, in their own voice. And some people like me, I just feel him. I just feel him
Right.
because I'm such a big
You feel
fan.
his presence right there
Hmm.
because he's watching over you and he's protecting you. You and your husband. His spirit is still there.
It
And
feels
that's
that
why I
way.
said that's your angel.
I called him the angel of my world.
Yeah,
Um,
because I know, I'm sure you find your time, at times find yourself talking to him.
oh, often, and
And you
thinking,
probably say, well, Christopher, what would you do then in this and that? And
yes,
how should I do this? What do you think? Right?
yes, I think he really gives me so much strength, and he sort of supports the same thing that I think, um, in a way, he's a little bit like my higher power, right? Because he helps me know what's what's right and good and what's going to help others. And one of his most beautiful qualities was that he really cared about other people, and was so loving and accepting of everyone. And if they were in pain, he was empathetic. So I too want to embody that and be there for other people because um, I'm feeling with them. I'm feeling with anyone grieving, anyone who's navigating some of the things that I know I've been through.
Right. Is that why you became a social worker?
It is. It's
Oh,
exactly why. It really,
but you became the social worker before Christopher transitioned, right?
I did. I became
Okay.
the social worker um, after having gotten sober. I was working in marketing, and I wasn't feeling, I was just selling technology and
Right.
doing what I thought I was supposed to in the world to get by, and then when I got clean and sober and I started to do volunteer work, I felt so rewarded and satisfied, that I wanted to do something that was more fulfilling in that way. Then, when I became a mom, I let my license lapse for a long time because I was so
Oh,
busy and I was doing all these part-time jobs while trying to raise the kids, and then as they got older, that's when I got my license back. And so the timing is really interesting. It almost feels like God had a hand in it because before Christopher passed, I
transition.
transitioned. Before he
Oh,
transitioned, I was I was already embarking on this, and he knew that I was already working in the field, and he knew that I was gonna make a point of being specialized in addiction. And I just knew that he was behind me and still is in every client that I see.
so with Christopher's experience, this gave you a better insight of the clients that you see, correct?
Yes, I actually see clients, some of whom are in recovery, and I see some who are struggling to get into recovery, but I see even more clients who are in relationship with people who struggle with addiction. So, and I have a couple whose children are. I've had, so everything I've gone through in my own life ends up being something that I feel like I can bring to my professional,
Right.
whether it's grief or what, any which way, I have a little bit of inside, experience, but I also really try to do my own personal work to grow and heal so that I have something to offer.
But I'm sure you see a therapist as well.
I have seen many therapists.
Because I know I hear people who are social workers that said the social worker needs a therapist too. Because
You
I'm sure
do.
you're taking in all that information, it has to be a big load. And you have to have an out as well.
It's
So,
true. It's true. I have a couple of new, I have people that I consult with, that
right,
we share our experiences because you do need to take care of yourself in such a way as you don't absorb it all. You help, but then you return back to yourself.
right. You go to a group for grief counseling or something?
I go to a couple of groups with other social workers or clinicians who help process through some of sometimes you hope you're doing right by them but will give you other strategies and ideas and support. And then I also believe in, at the end of the day, sort of performing a ritual of coming back to yourself so you're not carrying, because I only have one, two shoulders to carry things on.
Right.
Yeah,
In other words, you're carrying their load, so you have to release.
that's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
I'm sure that's what happens like with any profession when you're dealing with people and they're dumping on you. You have to have your release as well.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
It's a real interesting. I mean, I feel so lucky I get to do it because I get let into the lives of the people I see, but then I can't stay in that place
Right. You can't carry their burdens with you. You got your own.
any more than a mother can, right? So part of what
Right.
I was learning from grieving Christopher and raising him was I couldn't prevent anything from happening. He had to learn things, and each of my children have to learn things the hard way. And face their own challenges so they can grow. And what I really need to be doing with them is sort of some of the same thing I do with the people I see. It's just love them and support them and offer suggestions if they ask me. And that's about all I can do.
Right. How did the other two children deal with his transition?
It's been very hard for each of them. Each of them were just beginning to get to a place because Caroline was 2 years younger. Christopher perceived that things came more easily to her, and in some ways they
When
did.
she was a girl.
Yeah, because and she also makes it look like she looks like she can pull off,
Right.
and she they were really building a friendship as they got, because then they
Okay.
were
Because they
19 and
caught up in the age.
exactly. And then
That's what it was.
with William, 6 years younger, he'd always been kind of the annoying little baby brother who wanted to tag along. And with them too, it was becoming more reciprocal. Chris was talking to him about how cool he thought he was, and so just at the time when they were really finally getting to a place that felt better, and then he transitioned, that made it extra hard and a little more
Oh.
complicated,
How are they doing now? It's 9 years. They're okay?
Yeah. And look, this grief process, it's funny in my field or maybe in the world, as humans, we think we're supposed to be over it. We're supposed to
You
move.
never get over it.
Mm-mm.
Never. How is your husband doing?
He's great. You'll laugh, Francis. He's now writing his third book, and I
Oh,
have my one, my only, and he's writing. He writes. He's a good storyteller, and he writes more about um, his own search to connect to Christopher.
okay. Okay.
Um, and he really and he feels like he can hear him, and literally, he's got more conviction than I do, even that he knows exactly what Chris is thinking, and I'm still just kind of guessing and thinking I sure feel like I do.
That's why I said the voices, we can't remember that voice, so we hear it in our mind. And
Yes.
those are the voices that we hear. Or like sometimes I'm sitting, I'm thinking, I'm saying, what would mommy do? And I think I'm hearing her voice, but I'm hearing something that she said to me. And
Yes.
that's what it is.
It's interesting, isn't it, the way this comes through,
Yeah.
and so I believe that we're being looked after. I know Chris is looking after his siblings. I know that he, in his own way, however he can, showers them with love, and wants them to have lives filled with joy. One of the things that can sometimes be hard is if you're feeling so loyal to the person who's transitioned, you feel like it's not okay to live your life joyfully, and
You
to
feel guilty.
you do that guilt
Yeah.
comes.
You feel guilty.
Mhm.
And I can understand because I always hear parents, that we're supposed to go before our children, not the other way. But then I said, it's really sad, but then God has the final say. We don't know why. We don't know why some go early, but all I can say is whatever mission there was on this earth, it was finished. And that's why they go.
I
It's
believe
not a
that.
nice thing, but they
No,
go.
I believe that to be true, and I believe that Christopher wasn't, we all die, and Christopher wasn't meant to stay any longer.
He had finished his mission,
He really
and
had.
his mission poured into you, where you are now counseling people or people who are going through what he's going through. So with him, you could use his story and they'll understand, you
Absolutely.
know.
It gives me such, it just magnifies the feeling of love, it just
Right.
really does. And this grieving process is hard enough without um, putting ourselves through that kind of guilt. But it is a natural thing that most of us, especially if you lose a child, you're gonna fight that kind of powerlessness and resist it. And I could have done this, or I should have done that. And it's just as you said, it's better for us in our own healing to ultimately like reconcile that and make peace with God's plan.
Yeah, because I know I think about my mother and I was like, what could I have done different? And I told the other person I interviewed, she was dying. And my son was like, Ma, look at her. She's not the same anymore. He was like, you're selfish. And I was like, I'm not selfish. He was like, yes, you are. He was like, people who are dying only stay because you want them here. If you tell her she can go, she'll leave. And that's what I did.
Yeah, what
She left.
happened? I've
Yeah.
heard that so many times. And
So, and I wish I would have went to grief counseling when my mother passed. I think it would have helped me.
I bet it would have, because it sounds like you were doing that thing that we all inevitably do that's so human. We think that we should have done something, or you feel guilty because you wanted her to stay, which was, of course you wanted her to stay. It's very hard to let go. And
Yeah. And
and
that's why I said, before I came on here, I said, I had to pray for you because as a mother, I know it's hard, and
it
I
is.
said, I just have to handle it in a way where I didn't make you feel any kind of way, you know. Because I said to myself, I said, I wonder if Sally feels like if she's blaming herself. I wondered that. Did you?
Yeah, I did. I absolutely had to forgive myself in a big way. I had to go through the process of forgiving myself. I I really had the sense that Christopher would not, that there was nothing he would suggest that I had done, that I should have done differently. But one of the toughest pieces for me was that, he died on January 3rd of 2016, and he'd gone into the city. He was on his break from school, and he was such a hellion. He'd gone, he'd started drinking and drugging again, and I'd kind of
Oh,
tried to let go. And he just wanted to be like all of his friends and go to college, and who could blame him for that, right? And
you can't even say his was peer pressure. His was his addiction.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
So nobody could ever say Christopher was pushed to do this. This was his addiction calling him.
exactly. He one of the things that called him probably more, just as much as his addiction, is his desire to not be different. He
Right.
hated feeling different as a little boy who had some learning issues, who couldn't focus his attention. He just wanted to be like
He
everybody else.
wanted to be like everybody else and accept it, just
Yes,
like everybody else. He didn't want to feel like nothing was wrong.
he exactly. And he was so good about helping other people feel like there was nothing wrong with them. And even if they had something that was different, it was beautiful, So
Right.
he could give to other people some things that he couldn't always give to himself. And so um he'd gone into the city, and he'd partied, and he'd come through New Year's Eve, which is a big night of celebration, and I'd gone like this and thought, oh, phew, he kind of got through that one without, you know, it wasn't that I thought that he was going to die, but I just was like, oh, he didn't, we didn't have to go into the city and get him. He hadn't gotten into a fight, or the police weren't involved, or,
Right,
that
right.
was the kind of trouble that we were kind of getting accustomed to,
Oh, okay.
just
So he didn't
any
get
any
in
kinds of,
trouble.
things like, um, just there were always, there were antics, Francis. So,
Oh, okay.
and it was part of his, again, part of his charm is that he would be out, and then something would happen, and then his arm would be broken, and I mean, just those kinds of things.
I
And
think like him, like with my son, they don't have any fear.
no,
And that's what it is. He never had fear growing up. So to him, it was like whatever, like my son with the rollerblades.
exactly,
And
yep.
now he has a motorcycle, and it's like no fear, but I'm your mother, so yes, I worry about these things.
Of course, of course. And we can't help but, and it keeps us on our toes. And one of the things that I was trying to practice, and have tried to practice with my other kids, because I know it's one of my life lessons, is to not be in as much fear, so that I'm not trying to control things that I can't,
Right,
so that I can be present and loving, and let you all figure things out for yourselves. And then if something happens and you fall, I'm here. But after Chris had gone out that way, he turned to me and he asked me whether he thought I should either go back into the city with some buddies, or go up to his friend's lake house.
and he went to the lake house.
And I think I said to him, I know I did, I said, oh, I think the lake house sounds nice, because what was his mother thinking? That sounds quieter. That sounds like maybe you won't have the odds of getting into trouble. And then lo and behold, he and three other boys thought it'd be a good idea to get in a canoe on a frozen lake and none of them made it out alive. And so I can't have controlled that.
No.
But of course, I wish I could have.
But I know you feel bad because you said the lake, and that's where
Do.
you felt bad. Yeah.
I do.
That's why I asked you, you know. But
Mhm.
don't feel bad, you know. Don't hold yourself accountable. You did what you thought was, you said what you thought would be better for him, not knowing that they were going to get in this canoe, in this frozen water, and just that would be it.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And
Are you friends with their parents, the other boys' parents?
I don't know all of the parents, but I know of one set of the parents, and everybody has been, gone through. This is so traumatic, and so I care very much about how they're doing, and I feel for them. But it's kind of our own road, right? And
Right, right,
grief can be lonely, even shared, and so it's so important. It's been so important for me to take in what you were just saying. There's nothing you could have done. And even if that particular thing hadn't have happened, people will come up with crazy things like they think they should have done, and
right. But we don't know, you know.
we torture ourselves in so
Yes,
many
we
ways.
blame ourselves for things that we couldn't prevent.
Right.
You know, we hold this guilt thing over our head all the time.
Yeah.
So
And so
I
that,
understand.
yeah, it's just that was a part of, and that's part of the reason that it's taken time. And that's part of the reason why I think some grieving parents stay tortured, because they don't know how not to be continue to feel that on top of
Right.
their
'Cause I
pain.
think they figure if I would have been there, this wouldn't have happened. But
Right.
then we don't know.
And my brother teases me. He says, "What are you going to do? Christopher, you couldn't, he wouldn't have done anything you said anyway. The fact that he went and did that, he might have, you just, I didn't have that kind of power. And I do know that somewhere deep inside.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah. That was Christopher's journey.
it sure
And
was.
he while he was here, he was fun.
So
And
fun,
you have a lot of good memories of
truly.
him. So you have to keep those memories with you. And I'm sure his siblings do too, especially with William not wanting nobody wanted to be bothered with him.
Chris loved his little brother. He just was also hard on him.
Yeah, he didn't want to have time for the little kid. Go away,
That's
go
right.
away.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
And your husband, he's doing okay. So
We're doing okay, and and wow, do I feel grateful. I get to be Chris's mom, and I will always be. And I feel grateful that I've just let myself feel the pain when it comes, so that it kind of slowly lightens over time. And I know that for the rest of my life, it's going to hit me from time to time.
right.
It's going to
It
hit me.
comes in spurts, but you are holding on strong and you're able to share his journey with others. And perhaps by you sharing this journey, other young people would think first before they decide to do silliness.
I wonder, I hope
But
what
I pray that
I pray
more
they will.
people read that book and read
Thank
about
you.
Christopher so they'll think twice. And I'm going to make sure I put the book in the podcast so
Wonderful.
they can purchase it and read your story.
I
And
hope it gives comfort. Hmm.
yeah, because that's why I said I needed to talk to you because I only saw parents who they held on to this grief. Like I had a cousin, her daughter was in a coma. And then she was given the wrong medication at the hospital. She went into a coma. She died, and her mother was distraught.
Yes.
Her mother had another baby, but while she was pregnant with the other baby, she died herself. Isn't that sad? Yeah. And
So
then the
tragic.
living daughter that she did have, she ended up, she got hit by a car. So all three gone.
And we sort of could easily shake our hands at God in a situation like that. That's just too much.
And her mother blamed herself for taking her to the hospital. She had to get some asthma medicine, and they gave her too much. So her
Mm.
mother walked around with this guilt. And I
Oh,
watched her, and it was not a nice thing to see.
no, no, it probably killed her because you really can die of a broken heart.
Yeah, and that, even though she had a baby after she died giving birth and leaving the child here to be raised by her sister. And I said that, and then you have the little sister, the other sister that was alive, blaming the little sister for the mother's death. Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
so
And I
sorry.
said,
And
yeah,
I think about it that way sometimes, Francis. I think to myself, this has certainly been my most painful experience, but I can't often even fathom how we do, how we do this life and how some people meet with so much hardship and pain. It's um and all I can think of is that we're meant to learn and grow, and that hopefully we get to come back in another life and put into practice what we've learned.
yeah. Oh, I'm sure one of the children will have a child that's going to be just like Christopher. You're
You
gonna
know
have
what?
a grandchild just like Christopher. You're gonna come back and you're gonna tell me too.
I think you have a gift of your own, so I don't know why you don't believe in mediums, because I feel like you have that medium energy, and I know it's true that I will see Christopher's spirit show up
Hmm.
again.
Then your husband's gonna be like, he acts just like Christopher. And
Oh.
I bet you I know which one is gonna have the Christopher. It's gonna be William. That's who's gonna have Christopher again.
I
And
can't wait. I
yeah,
can't
and then
wait.
you're gonna be like, oh my gosh.
I'm gonna say, oh, I've been there. Now you know why I didn't. Yeah,
Exactly. And then you're gonna just spoil him and send him home. So
you better believe it. Yep.
you don't
That's
have
the
to
part
keep
that's so
him.
much easier, isn't it? Because I
Yeah, you don't
never
have to
did
keep him. You just spoil him and grandma, grandpa say, okay, bye.
absolutely. I'll be
Yeah,
much better at that.
yes. But I thank you for your time, Sally. This was a
It has
pleasant
been,
conversation. I'm glad we got to talk, and I'm glad that we got to talk about Christopher.
I am too, Francis. Thank you so much for having me. And it was felt really good to be with you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, but I don't want to make you cry, so I cried before I got here. So yeah, but don't hang up. I'm just gonna end this and
Okay.
I'm gonna stop. Okay.